Berlin. Morning. The Imperial Ministry of Aviation, a colossal building on Wilhelmstrasse, the headquarters of the Luftwaffe, Hermann Göring's office. Inside, hundreds of officers, analysts, and civil servants are at work. One of them, a young Oberleutnant, sits at a desk, reading secret documents. Reports from air attachés worldwide, bombing plans, data on aircraft production, losses, fuel reserves. He reads, makes notes, and transmits all of it to the Soviet Union. Every document, every number, every plan. He was Moscow's most valuable agent in Germany. But how did an officer working for these communists appear in the very heart of the Reich, in the ministry of a man who hated communists more than anything else? He was the grandnephew of Grand Admiral Tirpitz, an aristocrat, a man whose bride was personally walked down the aisle by Göring himself. His name was Harro Schulze-Boysen. This is the most audacious, most thrilling, and most terrifying spy story of World War II, with a chilling end. To understand how a German aristocrat became a Soviet agent, we need to start at the moment the regime first shattered his life. April 1933. Hitler had been in power for 2 months. Stormtroopers burst into the editorial office of Der Gegner, the opponent. It was a left-liberal publication led by 23-year-old Harro Schulze-Boysen, a young man from a good family, university-educated, with contacts in dozens of political circles, from nationalists to Marxists. The magazine was his idea, to unite youth against both fascism and capitalism. The Gestapo had already labeled the publication radical in February. Now the stormtroopers came to shut it down personally. Everyone found in the editorial office was taken to the barracks of the 6th SS Standard. Harro was brutally beaten, so severely that the consequences lasted a lifetime. Damaged kidneys, a disfigured ear, scars he carried until the very end. And his friend and colleague, A. Jew named Henry Erlanger, did not survive the beating. He never left that basement. Harro witnessed it with his own eyes. Think about it. You're 23. You're in a basement. You've just been beaten by men in uniform. And the person you worked with will never get up again. Because he was Jewish and worked with you. Harro was released a few days later, only because his mother, a woman with serious connections, pressured the right people. Henry Erlanger never left the basement, and this is where the strangest part begins, because any normal person after such an experience would flee, emigrate, keep quiet, hide. Harro Schulze-Boysen did the exact opposite. He went to work for the Luftwaffe. May 1933, a month after that basement incident, Harro enrolls in commercial aviation courses in Warnemünde. By 1934, he's already in the Imperial Ministry of Aviation in the News and Press Department. He works with foreign air attachés. He studies reports from embassies worldwide, documents that 99% of the German population would never see pass through his desk. And he, the very same guy who was beaten by stormtroopers in a basement a year and a half ago, the same system that killed his friend now trusts him with secret documents. Sure, absolutely normal personnel policy. But wait, that's not even the wildest part. In 1936, Harro marries. His fiancée is Libertas Haas-Hai, an aristocrat, granddaughter of Prince Eulenburg. Before the wedding, press secretary for the Berlin office of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Yes, that MGM Hollywood movie stars red carpet. The wedding takes place in the chapel of Liebenberg Castle, the bride's family estate. And who walks the bride down the aisle? Guess who? Hermann Göring, commander of the Luftwaffe, the second most powerful man in the Reich. A neighbor on the estate, his country residence Carenhall, is located near Liebenberg Castle. Göring personally escorts the bride of a man who, 5 years later, will transmit every secret of his department to Soviet intelligence. If this were a script, the director would have cut the scene for implausibility. And here's the key question. How? How was a man flagged as politically unreliable in his personal file given access to secret documents? The answer is simple and absurd. Göring. When the Luftwaffe's personnel department reported to Goering that Schulze-Boysen had an unreliable past, Goering literally brushed it off. He said, "Old business, forget about it," and sent Harro to flight school, promoted him, advanced him. Schulze-Boysen received his rank, clearance, and an office in the ministry, thanks to the patronage of the very man whose organization he intended to betray. Goering thought he was doing a favor for the husband of an aristocrat from a neighboring estate. He was creating a spy. While Harro climbed the career ladder in the Luftwaffe, he was simultaneously building something else. From the mid-1930s, a circle began to form around him in Libertas. Friends, acquaintances, colleagues, artists, pacifists, communists, simply people who were uneasy about what was happening around them. Evening gatherings at the Schulze-Boysen's apartment at Weizstrasse 2, Charlottenburg district. They discussed philosophy, politics, art, and quietly, carefully, they began to resist. Leaflets, anti-government stickers on walls, aid to Jews and the persecuted, documenting the regime's crimes, and Libertas, she worked as a censor at the German Institute for Documentary Film, did something else, something for which she would be hanged in 1942. She began collecting photographs of war crimes that soldiers sent from the front. She didn't look away. She gathered evidence. For the future. For a tribunal that would someday come, if they lived to see it. The MGM press secretary, the cover girl, the aristocrat, secretly cataloging evidence for which she could be shot. Remember this moment. It's important for what happens later. In 1936, Harro met Arvid Harnack, an economist from the Imperial Ministry of Economics. 2 Reich officials, 2 secret anti-fascists, 2 men with access to secret documents. Around them, there were already more than 100 people, students, journalists, artists, diplomats, officers, more than 100 people in one network, in a city where an incautious whisper could make you disappear. A network that the Gestapo would later call the Red Orchestra. But that name, Rote Kapelle, would be coined later. For now, it was just a group of people doing forbidden things in the most dangerous city in the world. And for now, none of them had been caught. And now, 1941, January. And here, the story shifts from underground circle mode to spy thriller mode. Harro receives a new assignment, to the attaché group of the 5th Department of the Imperial Ministry of Aviation. His workplace is now in Wildpark, Potsdam, Luftwaffe headquarters. He processes incoming reports from air attachés from embassies worldwide. Everything passes through his hands. Force dispositions, deployment plans, bombing targets, data on aircraft production, fuel reserves, losses. Oberleutnant Schulze-Boysen, 31 years old, knows more about the Luftwaffe than some generals. March 27th, 1941. Arvid Harnack's apartment in Berlin. At the table are Harro, Harnack, and the 3rd Secretary of the Soviet Embassy, Alexander Korotkov. Korotkov is actually a career NKGB intelligence officer, working under diplomatic cover across Europe since the mid-1930s. He doesn't need leaflets or moral support. He needs data, military data. At this meeting, Korotkov assigns Harro his code name, Starshina, a Soviet military rank. From this moment on, Schulze-Boysen is no longer just an anti-fascist. He is an agent of Soviet intelligence, in one leap, from dissident to spy. And the first thing he transmits is monstrous. The attack on the Soviet Union has been decided. The date is imminent. On April 2nd, Harro informs Korotkov that the invasion plans are complete, and he hands over a list of targets, railway junctions that the Luftwaffe will bomb in the first hours of the war. Cities, stations, Leningrad, Kiev, Vyborg. Specific names, specific coordinates. Libertas and Adam Kukov personally whisper this list to Korotkov at Potsdamer Platz station, because radio communication with Moscow isn't working. They walk back and forth on the platform for several hours, repeating the names of the cities in Cyrillic, so the intelligence officer will remember them. Around June 13th, 1941, Schulze-Boysen prepares a detailed report, the final details of Operation Barbarossa, date, scale, directions of attack, including information about Hungarian airfields where German planes are stationed. On June 17th, the report lands on Stalin's desk. The People's Commissariat for State Security personally presents it to the leader. Stalin's reaction is one of those facts that makes you want to scream and be silent at the same time. Stalin writes in the margins of the report, "Pay attention. This is not from a source, but from a disinformer." He rejects it, dismisses it, doesn't believe it. On June 22nd, Germany invades the USSR. Everything, exactly as Schulze-Boysen described. Every detail, every city, every airfield. Wait, because this needs to be understood. A man risked his life, his own, his wife's, dozens of friends, to warn the country he was working for. The information arrived, landed on the right desk, and was thrown in the trash, because a paranoiac in the Kremlin decided it was a provocation. Sorge warned from Tokyo. They didn't believe him. Schulze-Boysen warned from Berlin. They didn't believe him. Stalin had accurate data from 2 independent sources, from 2 different countries, from 2 different continents, and decided that both were lying. 27 million people. That's what that note in the margin cost. But the war began, and Schulze-Boysen did not stop. On the contrary, after June 22, 1941, he accelerated. He recruited new people into the network. By autumn, his group stretched from Berlin to Prague, Augsburg, Hamburg, Magdeburg. Moscow demanded specifics: Luftwaffe losses, aircraft production rates, oil reserves, convoy data. Schulze-Boysen transmitted everything, including data on the sinking of 13 tankers. And here, pause for a second. Imagine what that looked like from the inside. You are a Luftwaffe officer. In the morning, a briefing with superiors. In the afternoon, analyzing weekly losses. In the evening, you rewrite loss figures on a scrap of paper to hand them over to someone you see once every 2 weeks at a safe house. And at night, you, your wife, and friends handwrite leaflets that someone will post in Charlottenburg stairwells in the morning. For each of these 3 actions, execution, you do all 3, every day. In February 1942, he and John Sieg drafted an appeal. The people are concerned about Germany's future. Several hundred copies circulated in Berlin. In the summer of 1942, the group organized a protest against the propaganda exhibition Soviet Paradise in Lustgarten, a space flooded with propaganda. And right in the middle of it, someone posted leaflets with the text, "The exhibition is permanent. It shows the true paradise of the Reich. War, hunger, lies, Gestapo. How much longer?" This was in the center of Berlin, in 1942, when one careless word could lead to execution. But let's be honest, they were desperately brave and desperately unprofessional, because real spies don't post leaflets. Real spies don't throw parties where semi-drunk guests discuss resistance. Real spies don't tell friends over dinner that they're working against the regime, which is exactly what Libertas once did. They weren't undone by one slip-up. They were undone by a chain of them. It started in Brussels. On June 29, 1942, German radio counterintelligence, Funkabwehr, captured Soviet radio operator Johann Wenzel. Wenzel was interrogated. Harshly. He broke. He gave up the codes. Funkabwehr had been tracking Red Orchestra radio transmissions since June 1941 but couldn't decipher them. Now, they could. Cryptographer Wilhelm Wauck received the keys from Wenzel and began decrypting old messages, one after another. And on July 15, 1942, he deciphered a radiogram from October 10, 1941, sent from Moscow to Brussels. In it, in plain text, was Haro Schulze-Boysen's name and home address. Moscow, requesting contact with its Berlin agents, sent their names and addresses over the radio. Not pseudonyms, not codes. Names, addresses, over the airwaves. Soviet intelligence killed its own people, with one radiogram, with one violation of basic rules of conspiracy. This wasn't even a mistake. It was negligence that cost people their lives. And what makes it truly unbearable is this. Whoever composed that radiogram most likely never spent a day in prison. An anonymous radio operator in Moscow. Nothing personal. Just didn't bother to encrypt the names. Routine. August 31st, 1942. Haro Schulze-Boysen sits in his office at the Imperial Ministry of Aviation. The Gestapo enters. Arrested. A few days later, Libertas is arrested. She panicked and fled to a friend who was already under surveillance. Then, Arvid Harnack and his wife Mildred. Then, dozens. Hundreds. In total, over 600 people were arrested in Germany, Belgium, and France in connection with the Red Orchestra case. A network that had operated for years crumbled in weeks. Like dominoes. The interrogations were conducted by Gestapo investigator Johannes Strubing. Remember that name? It will return. After the war, he not only admitted to conducting Schulze-Boysen's interrogations, and the methods he used leave no doubt. He made a career in West German intelligence services, using his experience with the Red Orchestra as a qualification. The prosecutor at the trial was Manfred Roeder, a Luftwaffe military prosecutor who, after the war, advised American intelligence and actively shaped the narrative that the Red Orchestra was exclusively a Soviet spy operation. Not resistance, not anti-fascism, just espionage, treason. This version, the executioner's version, Germany propagated for decades. December 15th, 1942. Imperial Military Court. 5 judges. A vice admiral, 2 generals, 2 professional lawyers. The trial was a farce. Roeder presented the evidence. The verdict was predetermined. Haro Schulze-Boysen, death by hanging. Libertas Schulze-Boysen, death by hanging. Arvid Harnack, death by hanging. Mildred Harnack, 6 years in prison. Hitler personally reviewed Mildred's sentence. 6 years? Not enough. Review, death penalty, execute. But before the execution, prison. And here, Libertas makes her last, most bitter mistake. In her cell, she meets the investigator's secretary, Gertrude Breiter. Libertas decides that Breiter is an ally, that she hates her superiors, that she can be trusted. Libertas tells her what she knows about other prisoners, asks her to deliver letters to her mother, asks for a typewriter to write poems, speaks with her more than a dozen times. Breiter is an agent provocateur. Every word Libertas says goes into the record. When the Gestapo informs Libertas of this betrayal, she is crushed. She trusted, for the last time in her life. She writes to her mother, "I had to drink the bitter cup." A few days later, the cup would be drained. December 22nd, 1942. Plötzensee Prison, Berlin. A small room. 8 iron hooks on a ceiling beam. A converted meat locker. The executioner, Wilhelm Röttger, carried out executions here almost daily. For him, it was routine. For those brought into this room, the last seconds of life. 7 o'clock and 5 minutes in the evening. Haro Schulze-Boysen is hanged. He is 33 years old. An hour and a half later, Libertas is executed. She is 29. On the same day, their close friends are executed. The Harnacks, the Schumachers, Hans Koppe, John Graudenz, Horst Heilmann. More than 50 members of the group are killed. Haro and Libertas's bodies were handed over to Humboldt University for scientific purposes. Even after death, the system found a use for them. When they were finished, the remains were taken to the Zehlendorf crematorium. Where their ashes rest is unknown, to this day. And now, what happened next? And this, perhaps, is the most disgusting part of the whole story. Because Haro Schulze-Boysen died twice. The first time, on the gallows in Plötzensee. The second, in post-war memory. In West Germany, the Red Orchestra was considered for decades not a resistance group, but a Soviet spy network. Traitors. And this version was not shaped by historians or journalists. It was shaped by the very people who killed them. Roeder, the prosecutor at the trial, advised American counterintelligence after the war and told them his version of events. His interrogation protocols became the basis for the first Western books about the Red Orchestra. Strubing, the very same investigator, made a career in the West German intelligence service, the BND. The executioners didn't just survive, they became experts. They were asked, who were these? Well, people. And they answered, traitors. And they were believed. For 30 years. In East Germany, a mirror distortion. The GDR transformed the Red Orchestra into communist heroes, stamps, streets, monuments, but living witnesses were controlled. The Stasi monitored the relatives of the group members to ensure they didn't say anything that contradicted the official version. One dictatorship killed them. 2 dictatorships appropriated their memory, used it for their own purposes. Neither told the truth. So who was he really? And the truth, as usual, it's dirtier and more interesting than any single version. Schulze-Boysen was neither a pure resistance hero nor a Soviet spy. He was both, simultaneously. A man who posted anti-government leaflets and transmitted coordinates for Soviet bombings. A man who helped Jews escape and worked for a state that sent people to the Gulag. A man who believed in justice and collaborated with a regime that had its own, very specific idea of it. This doesn't diminish what he did. It makes what he did real, alive, complex. Because real people are complex. And if you need a hero without contradictions, you're not looking in history. You're looking in a movie. The poems he wrote in his cell are still etched on a memorial plaque in Berlin. 4 lines. Even if we are destined to perish, we know the seeds will sprout. Even if heads fall, the spirit will still force the state to change. The seeds did sprout, but not as he thought. In 1969, 27 years after his execution, the Soviet Union posthumously awarded Schulze-Boysen the Order of the Red Banner. The country that ignored his warning a quarter century later honored him for his bravery. The country that didn't believe him in June 1941, 27 years later, pinned a medal to his chest. He, of course, never knew, because he was dead. For 27 years already. Harro Schulze-Boysen was born in 1909, executed in 1942, 33 years old. Length of life is not the measure, he wrote to his parents shortly before his arrest. He knew how it would end. Libertas, who in 37 dreamed of being a poet, and in 42 collected evidence of crimes seen across the Eastern Front. Arvid Harnack, the quiet economist with a degree from Wisconsin. Mildred Harnack, an American. The only U.S. citizen executed on Hitler's direct order. Hans Kopi, the radio operator, who was 26. His wife, Hilda. Gave birth to a daughter in prison. The daughter was named Hans, after her father, who by then had already been hanged. Over 100 people, not professional spies, not soldiers, students, artists, journalists, civil servants, housewives, people who decided that silence was worse than death, in a city where one leaflet could lead to execution. They made leaflets and they spied and they saved people and they documented crimes, all at once, all simultaneously, all under one roof. Because when you live inside a catastrophe, you don't choose one method of resistance. You use every one available. The Gestapo called them the Red Orchestra, Kapelle, because radio operators were called pianists in counterintelligence jargon, and their transmitters, grand pianos. Red, because Moscow. It was an insult, a label for traitors. They didn't choose it, but it was under this name, the name given by their executioners, that the world learned their story. And the executioners? Here's what happened to them. Investigator Strubing lived to old age. Prosecutor Roeder, too. The executioners lived long, comfortable lives. Those they executed did not. Their ashes are scattered. Their graves do not exist. December 22nd, 1942. 3 days before Christmas. Plötzensee Prison. 33 years old and 29 years old. Husband and wife. An hour and a half apart. The Red Orchestra operated in the heart of the Reich, dozens of invisible people for years, right under the Gestapo's nose. But they were undone not by a traitor or a mistake, but by a radio signal. Mathematics. The Germans caught the frequency, broke the cipher, and found the names. But one spy in Cairo was betrayed not by mathematics, but by his wife. Or rather, his second wife. This is the story of Wolfgang Lotz, the Champagne spy. Mossad in Cairo, parties with generals, microfilm in a heel, and a failure that began with a glass of wine. But that's for next time.